It's just so disgusting.
Harry and Meghan Markle's surrogacy scandal has entered the mainstream media domain.
Make you sound like a better mom. It makes you sound like really kind of into yourself in a way.
People think her kids are fake. They think they're AI.
Like, why lie? It was just so truly bizarre.
What if one of the most talked about royal birth stories was never as clear as it first sounded?
Take a listen.
This scandal comes as no surprise. Speculation about the children has been simmering for years.
For years, Meghan Markle and Prince Harry presented Archie's arrival as a deeply private moment, framed around protection, pressure, and stepping back from the usual royal machine.
Up a camera, fixate it, and then both of you start twerking. Because in her mind, she was thinking, I'm going to release this later in a Netflix doc or release it later to show people how relatable I am. Otherwise, you can have a cute moment with your husband without recording it. Like, why would you record this for any reason? Why would you record this in the
But now the conversation has gotten way messier because critics are lining up old details, public statements, and Harry's own memoir to argue that the story still does not fully add up.
Buckingham Palace is being pressured to remove Prince Archie and Princess Elizabeth from the UK's royal line of succession until the Duchess provides absolute proof that she popped out both babies herself.
One of the loudest people pushing that angle is Candace Owens.
Meghan is a trained actress. What she does is that she studies people. She's not a good actress, but she is a trained one, right? She's been doing it her entire life. And there is no doubt that she studied Princess Diana. She studied her mannerisms towards Harry when he was a boy and the way that she grabs her face. And this is the psychopathic elements of what she does, putting a pregnancy text next to Princess Diana's hair, saying that she put her hands on the grave to have a conversation with her, bursting into tears. And she has convinced there's a thing called in psychology called the Freudian transfer.
Who has been pointing to what she sees as major gaps in the public version of events. And she is not the only one asking questions.
Why would you do that? That's not necessary.
Silence everybody and just produce a DNA sample or proof of delivery.
It's like she's playing a human being, like it's a performance.
Online commentators, royal watchers, and even some people with medical knowledge have all zeroed in on the same thing. The timeline sounds polished on the surface, but once you start checking the details one by one, it begins to feel strange in a way that is hard to ignore.
Whether you think there was a surrogate, whether you think Meghan was wearing a moon bump, the fact is Harry and Meghan lied. Buckingham Palace lied on their behalf. There was a complete cover-up over the birth of Prince Archie.
That is where this whole situation starts getting serious. The issue is not just that people are being nosy about a royal baby story. It is that critics believe there are contradictions involving the labor timeline, the hospital stay, and the way the birth announcement was handled.
Instantly enraged from this 10-second clip. It just annoyed me. It bothers me first because it's a lie. She's not in the hospital trying to induce labor by twerking. The hospital will not give you a bed because you're trying to induce labor. You are not allowed.
Some say the couple wanted privacy, which is fair enough on its own. But others argue that the explanations given over time do not always match up cleanly. And that is exactly why this topic keeps coming back instead of fading away.
All of the pictures, my point is, out there were inconsistent with the idea of a real pregnancy.
I'm sorry, but, and genuinely, I don't even mean to attack her. There was something frustrating about her, and I think he hits nail.
Harry's memoir added even more fuel to the discussion when he described Archie being born at Portland Hospital, a high-end private hospital in London.
Harry and Meghan Markle's surrogacy scandal has entered the mainstream media domain.
Why have they simply not made an announcement to the fact that all of this speculation about the children's arrival?
In his telling, the scene sounded emotional, dramatic, and carefully remembered. But critics immediately locked onto the medical details, especially the claim that Meghan had 2 epidurals during labor and that the couple then left the hospital with their newborn not long after. To some readers, it sounded like a powerful birth story. To others, it sounded way too neat and way too fast. That is when people started saying, "Hold on, something here feels off." Medical commentators and mothers online began picking apart how realistic that version of events would be, especially when it came to pain relief, recovery time, and how quickly a mother and baby would normally be discharged after a first birth. Now, to be fair, every birth is different. Every hospital has its own procedures, and high-profile patients may be treated differently in some situations. But even with that in mind, critics say the overall picture still raises eyebrows. Then you have the issue of the press and the public rollout, and that is another part people keep circling back to. Royal births usually come with a level of structure, timing, and communication that the public has come to expect. But with Archie, the messaging felt different, delayed, and at times confusing.
Belly looks very abnormal. That it looks very strange. If you look up close in the video, and I encourage people, look at this. It looks like there's like a bag or like some sort of something shoved up under a dress. It does not look like a pregnant belly. It looks all bumpy. It's very strange. It looks like what you'd get if you put like a pillowcase full of like socks or something under your dress. You got to look up close. There's very strange bumps coming off of that pregnant belly. I don't know why, Stu, but for the first time ever, I'm kind of like, is this something we should be indulging? Because
supporters of Meghan and Harry would say that was intentional because they wanted boundaries. Critics, on the other hand, say the shifting explanations made the whole thing feel less like privacy and more like a story being managed in real time. And that is really why this topic has stuck around for so long. It is not just about one hospital visit or one memoir passage. It is about trust, public image, and whether the story people were given was fully straight from the start. Nobody can just jump in and declare the wildest theory as fact, and that matters.
Never seen this sort of. I've never seen someone that struggles to just give us like one strip of authenticity.
When you're pregnant, there's not a pillow under your skirt, and there's live footage of her walking towards camera with her abdomen swaying left to right in a black and white checkered dress.
But at the same time, when public figures give an account that leaves this many people comparing notes, asking questions, and spotting loose ends, the chatter is not going anywhere anytime soon. Now, this is where people really start leaning in, because the medical side of the story is what sparked the biggest reactions. An epidural is not something simple that you just switch on and off like flipping a light switch. It is a serious procedure involving a catheter placed near the spine, and it is carefully managed the entire time. So when Harry described Meghan having 2 epidurals during labor, that instantly caught attention. Not because it is completely impossible, but because many people familiar with childbirth started saying, wait, that's not how it usually works. Medical voices and experienced mothers began questioning why that would even be necessary in the first place. Typically, once an epidural is in place, it is adjusted rather than replaced. Doing it multiple times during active labor is seen as unusual, and in some situations, it can come with added risks. Again, every birth is different, and there are always exceptions, but critics argue that this detail alone makes the story feel less straightforward than it was originally presented.
So she's saying, you need proof that I'm authentic? I just dropped myself twerking. Obviously, I'm authentic. So she's bringing that up to say there is now PR. I have proven that I am authentic because I twerked with my husband in a room. That's not a normal way to answer the question. If somebody asked me about my authenticity, I would say I don't need to justify that I authentically am who I am.
Then comes the timeline after the birth, and this is where things get even harder for some people to accept. Harry's version suggests that Meghan gave birth, recovered, and was back home with Archie in what sounds like a very short window of time. For many listeners, that raised immediate questions. In most cases, especially for a first-time mother, or when pain management like an epidural is involved, hospitals tend to keep both mother and baby under observation for a longer period. We are talking about monitoring recovery, checking vital signs, making sure the baby is feeding properly, and confirming that everything is stable before discharge. That process usually takes time. So when people heard a version of events that sounded much faster than expected, they started doing the math for themselves. And once they did, the timeline began to feel tight, maybe even a little too neat. Now add in the location factor, and the situation becomes even more complicated. Portland Hospital sits right in central London, while Frogmore Cottage is not exactly around the corner. Between hospital procedures, paperwork, recovery time, and then the actual journey home, critics say it is hard to picture everything happening as quickly as described, even in a best case scenario. People argue that it would still take longer than what has been suggested publicly. So naturally, this leads to more questions. Not wild conclusions, not extreme claims, but simple questions about consistency. Why does the timeline feel so compressed? Why do certain details sound polished but not fully explained? And if some parts of the story seem unclear, people start wondering what else might have been simplified or left out entirely. And just when you think that is where it ends, the focus shifts to how the palace handled the announcement, and that opened a completely different conversation. Royal births have always followed a very structured process. Traditionally, the monarch is informed first, then an official statement is prepared, and the public is told in a clear and timely way. It is a system built on transparency and tradition, but with Archie's birth, things did not follow that familiar pattern.
He owes it to the public of each and every country of which the king is monarch to clear up any doubts about anybody in the line of succession. Meghan's conduct is what has triggered all of this. Oh, Archie doing a deep dive between the knees. Archie competing with Tom Daley before he was even given birth to. Archie's unique qualities, and we need to remember that Archie was truly unique because his first word was crocodile. And Archie, of course, was the product of a union that maritally started when they were roasting chicken. And I leave it at that. But what I will go back to say, in terms without giving too much levity to their Harry and Meghan's really crazed behavior.
The announcement felt delayed, and the usual steps seemed to be handled differently. Meghan later gave multiple explanations for why the press was not notified right away, and this is where critics really started paying attention. In one version, it was about protecting privacy. In another, it was linked to how the birth unfolded. And then there was yet another explanation that seemed to shift the reasoning again. Now, to be clear, wanting privacy is completely understandable, especially in such a personal moment. But when the explanation changes more than once, it naturally leads people to ask whether the situation was more complicated than it first appeared. And that is exactly why this story keeps getting revisited, because instead of one clear narrative, there are multiple versions that people are still trying to piece together. So why are there so many different versions of the same story? That is the question people keep coming back to, because even reporters who usually support the palace admitted they were confused by how everything unfolded. Some journalists were told Archie had already arrived hours before the public announcement, while others were still being told that Meghan was in labor at that same time. That kind of mixed messaging is not small. It is the type of thing that instantly gets people paying closer attention. And here is where it starts to feel bigger than just a simple mix-up. Royal communications are usually tight, controlled, and handled with serious precision. Staff, security, and press teams are known for sticking to protocol without slipping. So when something this important comes out with conflicting timelines and unclear updates, people naturally start asking if it was just confusion or something more intentional. Because let's be real, this level of inconsistency does not just break tradition, it makes the whole situation look uncoordinated. And when the public notices that, it can start to chip away at trust. That is why the secrecy and the changing details did not just spark curiosity. They pushed people into full-on speculation mode. Some think it was simply about keeping things private, while others believe the situation may have been handled in a way that created more questions than answers.
She has convinced Harry that she is Princess Diana, except this time he has an opportunity to save her. That is the truth. And it's worked, right? So she's done this convincing performance for Harry that I don't know how I ended here. I just love you. And I'm just like your mom. And the one chance that you had to save your mom again, when he recounts that tale and the things that she said, she threatened homicide on her unborn child and suicide on herself. And then she convinced Harry that it was his idea to leave the UK.
Now, nobody can jump straight to extreme conclusions, and that is important to keep in mind. But at the same time, when multiple versions of the same event are circulating, it becomes harder for people to know what actually happened and what might have been adjusted along the way. That is exactly why this story refuses to settle down. And then the focus swings right back to the medical details, which only adds another layer to the whole situation. When Harry described Meghan receiving 2 epidurals, that detail immediately stood out to anyone familiar with childbirth. Because an epidural is not just a quick shot you take and move on from. It is a careful procedure where a catheter is placed near the spine to provide steady pain relief over time. Once it is placed, doctors can adjust the dosage without needing to remove everything and start again. That is why people with medical knowledge started questioning the idea of having 2 separate epidurals during the same labor. It is not something that typically happens, and if it does, it is usually for very specific reasons that would require extra care and monitoring afterward. So when that detail was described in a way that sounded almost casual, critics began saying it did not match what they would expect in a real medical setting. Some even argued that it came across more like a dramatic retelling rather than a precise explanation of events. Again, that does not automatically mean anything extreme, but it definitely adds to the growing list of things people are trying to make sense of. And here is where everything starts to connect. If there really were additional procedures involved, then the idea of a quick recovery and fast discharge becomes even harder for people to understand. Hospitals usually keep a close watch after anything invasive, especially to avoid complications like drops in blood pressure, infection risks, or other issues that need time to monitor. So when you combine all of that, the multiple epidural claim, the fast return home, and the already confusing timeline, it creates a version of events that some people feel does not line up with how childbirth is typically handled. And that does not automatically prove anything, but it absolutely explains why so many questions are still being asked right now. Because at the end of the day, when details feel rushed, explanations shift, and timelines do not fully connect, people are going to keep looking closer. And that is exactly what is happening here, as more and more eyes go back over the story, trying to figure out what really makes sense and what still feels off. So now the question gets even more direct. Was this all just confusion? Or was the story shaped in a way that made everything sound more dramatic than it really was? Because with every small detail people pick apart, it feels like the situation keeps getting deeper instead of clearer. Let's talk about the recovery side for a second, because this is where a lot of people really start raising their eyebrows. Childbirth is not something most people just walk away from in a few hours, no matter how comfortable or high-end the hospital is.
He can't see the writing on the wall that she is trying to embody his mother. Even when he told a story about how she said she was going to commit suicide while she was pregnant and that she was having suicidal thoughts. And you can see in everything that she does, she tries to put this pressure on him of like, well, look what happened to your mom. Like that could happen to me unless we do exactly what I want, which is to move back to Los Angeles and to be the A-list actress that I never was and to be in those circles. And I think that she's manipulated him using the death of his mother, which is so creepy and so scary. And I think that he's got some weird maternal syndrome with her, and that he thinks that he can somehow save his mother by doing everything and making sure that Meghan is happy.
Standard medical care usually involves keeping a close watch on both the mother and the baby for a full day or even longer. Doctors check vital signs, monitor recovery, and make sure everything is stable before even thinking about discharge. There are routine checks, follow-ups, and careful observation to make sure nothing unexpected happens. That is not about status or privilege, it is just basic medical safety. Now add another layer to this, because Meghan has spoken before about dealing with health concerns related to pregnancy. If something like that was part of the situation, then the level of monitoring would normally be even more strict. Conditions involving blood pressure or complications are taken very seriously, and medical teams usually do not rush that process at all. So when people compare that to the timeline described in Harry's memoir, it creates a big disconnect. The version presented sounds fast, controlled, and almost cinematic, like everything moves smoothly from one moment to the next. But critics argue that real-life medical care does not usually move at that kind of speed, especially when multiple factors are involved, and this is where opinions start to split even more. Some people believe the story may have been simplified or told in a way that focused more on emotion than strict detail. Others think certain parts might have been left out entirely to keep the narrative clean and easy to follow. Either way, it leaves people trying to figure out what was emphasized and what might have been brushed over. It also creates an awkward situation. When you look at Meghan's public stance on maternal health, she has spoken about the importance of proper care, awareness, and making sure mothers get the attention they need during and after pregnancy. So when her own story sounds like it moves faster than what many consider standard care, critics say it sends mixed signals. Now again, that does not automatically mean anything was done wrong, but it does explain why people are questioning whether the version shared publicly reflects the full picture or just a carefully presented one. And just when it seems like everything is based on public statements and interpretations, that is, when reports from inside the hospital start adding another layer. There have been claims from unnamed staff suggesting that certain details from Harry's story do not line up with how things typically operate behind the scenes. One example people keep bringing up is the mention of late-night food during the hospital stay. On paper, it sounds like a small detail, almost harmless, but some insiders have hinted that the way it was described does not match the usual routines patients experience in that setting. Now, it is important to be careful with anonymous claims because they are not always confirmed. But at the same time, when those kinds of comments start stacking up alongside everything else, they add to the overall sense that the story might not be as straightforward as it first appeared. And that is really what keeps this conversation alive right now.
And then you had this idea with your husband that you should twerk and put up a camera. That's the part that really bothers me. Put up a camera, fixate it, and then both of you start twerk billionaire friends' mansions, and you pull the honey from the back so that you have fresh honey to bake, to give to gifts to your friends, but also she twerks. I just need one or the other. I need you to twerk. I need Sexy Red. I need Cardi B. Keeps it authentic, or I need you to be Gwyneth Paltrow.
It is not one single detail causing all this attention. It is the combination of timelines, medical questions, and behind-the-scenes whispers all coming together at once. And just when it seems like the story could not get any more detailed, even the smallest parts start getting picked apart. One example people keep bringing up is the mention of food during the hospital stay. Yes, Portland Hospital is known for offering high-end meals. That part is not surprising at all, but critics say that some of the specific cravings and food details described do not fully match what certain staff members reportedly remember being served at the time. Now, on its own, that might sound like a tiny detail that does not matter much. But when people are already questioning bigger parts of the story, even small inconsistencies start to stand out more than they normally would. It becomes less about the food itself and more about whether every part of the story lines up the way it was told. Then there is the part about the so-called secret elevator, which definitely caught attention. In Harry's memoir, it was described in a way that made it sound like there was a hidden route designed for privacy and quick movement. But according to individuals familiar with the hospital, while the building does offer private access points and discrete pathways, there is no special hidden system like the one described. Instead, it operates like a typical high-end, a medical facility that already prioritizes privacy without needing anything that extreme. Again, one detail like this might not seem like a big deal on its own, but when added to everything else, it becomes another piece people try to fit into the larger puzzle. And that is really what is happening here. These are not just random complaints being thrown around. It is a growing list of moments where critics feel the public version of events sounds more polished than practical. Some even point to comments from unnamed insiders who suggest the overall hospital experience may have been calmer and less dramatic than how it was later described. Of course, anonymous claims should always be taken carefully because they are not officially confirmed. But when those comments appear alongside other inconsistencies, they add more fuel to an already active conversation. Candace Owens has been one of the most vocal figures highlighting these details, arguing that when smaller points start to fall, apart under closer inspection, it naturally leads people to question the bigger picture as well. Her stance is not just about one or two details, it is about whether the entire narrative was shaped in a way that controlled how the public would see it.
Either Archie or Lily, and it needs to happen. They need to prove that those children, Meghan and Harry, are not entitled to privacy in this matter. And their privacy is trumped by our right to know that no bastard is going to sit on the throne of this country. All Harry and Meghan need to do is prove to us that she popped those babies out. And that's all they need to do. And if they don't, it is unfair on the children. It's also unfair on the royal family.
Now, that opens the door to multiple interpretations. Some believe the story may have been adjusted to protect privacy in a system where personal moments are constantly under a microscope. Others think certain elements may have been emphasized to create a more emotional or impactful version of events. And then there are those who take it a step further and suggest that the secrecy could have been tied to protecting the institution itself, rather than just the individuals involved. That idea is not confirmed, but it shows just how many directions this conversation has gone. What is clear is that the more these details are discussed, the more people start asking one simple question. Why do some parts of the story feel so hard to pin down? Not in a dramatic or extreme way, but in a way where things do not fully connect no matter how many times people revisit them. Because once trust starts to slip, even slightly, it becomes difficult to rebuild. Every timeline that feels off, every detail that changes, every explanation that shifts just a little bit, it all adds up over time. And that is why this situation continues to stay in the spotlight. It is not just about proving something right or wrong. It is about how a story was told, how it was received, and why so many people are still trying to figure out where perception ends and reality begins. And this is where everything comes full circle, because after all the timelines, all the details, and all the back and forth, one thing is clear. People are still questioning the entire story. Not just one moment, not just one claim, but the overall picture that was presented to the public from the very beginning. When you stack it all together, the memoir descriptions, the hospital details, the press confusion, and the small inconsistencies that keep popping up, it creates a version of events that some people feel just does not fully connect.
Paying multi-million-dollar PR firms to tell your story the way you controlled it, the way you wanted it told, while you also disparaged and silenced others. Had those things, it would be very easy just to put them out there and say, this is what happened. This is what it is.
Now, that does not mean anyone can jump in and declare something extreme as fact, but it does explain why this topic refuses to fade away and why so many people are still looking at it with a critical eye. Candace Owens may have brought extra attention to these points, but the questions themselves have been circulating for a long time. People have been quietly comparing timelines, noticing details, and trying to figure out why certain parts of the story feel harder to pin down than they should be. And every time a new explanation comes out, instead of closing the conversation, it often ends up opening even more doors. That is the real takeaway here. It is not just about one version versus another. It is about how quickly trust can start to shift when things do not fully line up. Because once people begin to feel like they are not getting the full picture, even small details can start to carry a lot more weight than expected. And here is the part that really keeps viewers hooked. This is not the only situation tied to Meghan that has people talking right now. There are other moments, other claims, and other stories that are starting to gain attention, and they connect in ways that make this whole situation even more interesting. For example, there have been public comments from Thomas Markle that sparked a completely different wave of discussion. Now, just like everything else, those claims come with their own debates and should be viewed carefully. But when you put it alongside everything we just talked about, it shows how many layers there are to this entire story. So if you thought this was intense, there is a lot more waiting right after this. The next video on your screen dives even deeper into these conversations and breaks down another angle that people cannot stop talking about. Right now, if you want the full picture, you definitely do not want to miss that one. And before you head over, make sure you hit that like button, drop your thoughts in the comments, and subscribe so you do not miss what is coming next. Share this with someone who has been following this story too, because the more perspectives, the better. Tap into that next video showing on your screen right now for more celebrity drama and deeper breakdowns. Stay sharp, keep questioning what you see, and I will catch you in the next one.